Welcome to this introductory tutorial on SPSS. This tutorial will cover entering data into the SPSS data editor. It'll cover basic manipulation and preparation of data for analysis. Then we'll look at running basic descriptive statistics, and finally we'll look at using the SPSS syntax editor. Part 1, preparing a data set. Welcome to SPSS. So when you first open the program, you'll be given a few different options. These options include opening an existing data file or typing in new data. To get a blank data set like this one here with nothing in it, you would select the option to type in new data. So before you enter any data, you'll notice that both screens look the same. So we have the data view screen and the variable view screen, and without any data or values entered into the data set, they do look quite identical. However, you will see that they are very different once we get into actually using them. So to start, we'll go to the data view. So the data view is very similar to Excel in that this is where we're going to see all of the raw values in our data set. So how it works in SPSS is that each row represents a participant. So if we start creating some data here, so we'll start by creating an ID variable. We can give participant 1 an ID of 1, participant 2 an ID of 2, participant 3, 3, 4, 4, 5, 5, etc. So what we've actually done here is we have created a variable with 5 values, and SPSS knows that we have 5 participants in this data set because we have 5 activated rows. So for example, if we were to enter more data along here, SPSS would know that we're adding participants. Whereas if we were to enter data into these columns, SPSS would know that we are adding additional information about the existing participants. If you're to enter information, say down here on row 14, okay, so we entered a 1, SPSS has automatically added all these other participants here. Okay, notice right now the values have been activated. However, since we didn't actually enter any values, they're just being identified right now by this period, which means that there's no information there. So for now, we'll delete all of these participants. But there we go. So now we're just back to 5. Okay, so right now SPSS has given this first variable a default name called var0001. If we want to change the name to that, it's very simple. We just need to click on the variable view here, and it's going to bring us to a different view. And what we can see here is the name of our variable, and by double-clicking, we can change it. So we will call it ID. SPSS is pretty open in terms of what you name your variables. The only rules are that they have to start with alphanumeric letters, so it has to be letters. You can have numbers and symbols in your variable names, however, they can't start with that. You can't have any spaces, so if you do want to add a space, you have to use an underscore, and then you can put numbers or whatever you want afterwards, and it'll be okay. But for now, we'll just keep that as ID. So you'll notice that we also have a lot of other options here, but before I show you those options, we're also going to create a few other variables. So we'll have gender and score. So gender is going to be a categorical variable where you have 2 categories. You can be either male or female. And score, let's say we have scores on a test from 0 to 10. So if we go back here, we're going to enter the rest of our information. So we have our participant IDs here, and now we want to enter gender. So SPSS can handle word variables. They call them strings. However, for the purposes of running analyses, it's always better to use numbers. So when trying to indicate gender, instead of writing male and female, you should assign a code to male and assign a code to female. So typically with gender, we would use 0s and 1s or 1s and 2s. So let's say for this particular example that males will be 1 and females will be 2. So I've entered this here, and I'll show you shortly how to make that also mean male and female, but for now we just have the numbers. And then these are their scores on 10. So let's say we have 7, 8, 9, 8, 10. Perfect. So we have a continuous variable here and a categorical variable and an ID variable. So if we go back to our variable view, we can tell SPSS a little bit more about this, and we can look at the different options here. So numeric essentially means that we're using numbers in the data set. I did mention that SPSS can handle words. However, if you're going to enter words, you have to change the type of variable here to string down at this option, and then SPSS knows to try or not to try to interpret the values in that variable as numbers and try to analyze it. Unfortunately, SPSS can't actually analyze string variables, so if you do indicate something as being string, it's just going to skip over it and not use it. So that might be fine if you're entering someone's address or something. However, if you do want to look at gender differences, you need to use the numeric option. So generally, we're going to just use numeric. Okay, the width here refers to how many characters wide the variable will be, and it includes the decimals. So for example, right now, let's say none of these variables need decimals, so we can take the decimals out. And you'll see now, if we go back, I only changed 2 of them, that the first 2 variables now don't have decimal points, but score still does. So we'll get rid of that here. And then we can also just reduce the overall width of the variable to, say, 2. And it just means that it won't be quite as wide, and that's that. So decimals and width are dealt with. Label is an opportunity to give a name to your variable that doesn't meet the name requirements of SPSS. So let's say, for example, that you found this code here that you've given it very ambiguous, and you'd like to use, maybe a longer sentence or some spaces to indicate something. You could here, for example, put, test scores or males and females instead of gender. And what this means is that when SPSS runs analyses with these variables, instead of using the variable name, it'll use this information to say that it's doing that. So we can leave that no problem. Or actually, we'll replace that just by gender. So values, this is very useful for categorical data if you want to assign a number or a code to the values in your variable. So if you recall, for the gender variable, we had indicated males with 1 and females with 2. Well, now to let SPSS know that we're doing that, we would click on this, and we would say 1 is male, and then you click add, and 2 is female, and click add. So once these are here, you can click OK, and then they should show up right there under the values option. And if we go back to the data view, you'll notice that nothing is changed. However, if we click up here, we can ask SPSS to show us the value labels, and if we click that, it changes to male and female. However, we still do have that underlying numerical value, which means that SPSS will be able to run analyses on this variable. Okay, going back. The next option we have is missing variable. So right now, our data set does not have any missing data, but if we were to go back and let's say that participant 4 is missing a score here. So if we want to tell SPSS that this is actually a missing data, we can assign it a code. Traditionally, we use something like 9999, and then we go back to the data set, and on score missing here, we would select discrete missing labels, and we could give it the code of 9999, and SPSS will automatically know that that is a missing value and that we will not analyze that particular case. Okay. Next option is the columns. You can ignore that. The alignment, you can also ignore that. And then the measurement level. So sometimes if you enter a lot of data into SPSS automatically or import data, it will attempt, based on the patterns of the data, to determine what the measurement level is. However, you should always double check this because it doesn't always get it right. So there are 3 options in SPSS. Scale refers to anything that's measured at the interval or ratio level. Ordinal is ordinal measurement, and then anything that's categorical is nominal. So in the case here, our ID variable, even though it technically, has a numerical value and sort of is ratio, since we're arbitrarily assigning these, you have to go with it's a nominal variable, and really you shouldn't use it in any analyses. It's more just to identify your participants. However, it's a good idea to make it nominal. Gender is also nominal because it's categorical. And our score on tests would be scale because it's a ratio variable where there is a 0 and the distance between each score is the same. And then you can ignore this last column here. So the reason it's important to use ID variables is because if ever you decide to sort your data, so let's say for example that we are going to sort our data in ascending order here, so just by right clicking. Okay, so this output box is going to open. We close here, and what we've noticed is that it's now sorted the data from smallest to largest, and we've actually switched the order of the participants. So the numbers here no longer correspond with the same number they did before, and you can tell that based on the fact that this variable has been reordered. So obviously with just 5 participants and 3 variables, this isn't a really big deal. However, when you start having really large data sets, it's very important to assign an ID number so that you can keep track of which row of data belongs to which participant. Part 2, transforming data. So sometimes in SPSS, before we can run any analyses, we have to make certain transformations to our data. So before we do that, let's add a few more participants. So we'll add 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. And again, we'll arbitrarily assign them a gender and a score. So first things, let's assume that we want to create a new variable where we say whether participants have either passed or failed a course. So here we have 10 people, and we'll no longer have this missing data here. Let's say that this person got a 3 on 10. So let's say that in order to pass this course, you need at least a score of 5 on 10 or higher. So we want to recode this into a pass-fail. So it's pretty easy to do with SPSS. So what we'd have to do is click on this option called Transform, and we would do recode into different variable. So what we're going to do is take our score variable here and bring it over into the input box. And then we're going to give a name to our new variable, which is going to be score, pass, fail. So if you notice, I'm applying all the rules for naming variables in SPSS. Okay, so old and new values. So what we need to do here is we need to assign a code for pass and fail. So what's easy there is we'll say that 1 is a pass, 2 is a fail. So that means that anything in the existing variable that has a score of 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, or 10 is going to be a 1 in the new variable because it's a pass. Anything below 5 is going to be a 2 in the new variable, which is a fail. So you can do each of these values independently, or we can do a range. So we can do 5 through 10, and then here we would say is equal to 1. So these are the old values, these are the new values, and we click Add. So what it does here is it says 5 through 10 equals 1. And then we can do 0 through 4 equals 2. Okay, so we have 5 through 10 is a 1, 0 through 4 is a 2. Click Continue and click OK. This output window opens, okay, and we close this, and suddenly we have our new variable, pass-fail. So if you recall, we need to go now to the variable view and specify that 1 equals pass and 2 equals fail. Click OK. And now if we go back here, we can click on this option, and now we have our pass-fail variable. Okay, some other times we might need to either take an average or add up variables. So let's say that we actually had our students do another test. So we'll say score 2. And again, it was on 10, and we have, different scores, just random. Excellent. So now we have 2 variables. So we might want to create a new variable that represents the sum of these 2 scores. So it would be a total on 20. So what we would do is we would go to Transform, Compute Variable. And then from here, we actually have a giant calculator. So we'll call this score total. So we just have to give it a name. And actually here, we just treat this like a regular calculator. So you would do score plus other score. So just by double clicking, and it appears here, and you don't even have to double click. You can just write the variables out yourself if you want. And if, it works just like a regular calculator. So if you wanted to add brackets and have this function done first, and then maybe multiplied by gender, this is an option. Doesn't necessarily make sense, but you get the idea. So we can just leave it here and click OK. Again, this window is going to open, and suddenly now we have our scores on 20. So we have 13, 15, 14, etc. And if you check it out, 7 plus 6, 13, 8 plus 7, 15, etc. So again, right now, SPSS automatically puts the default of 2 decimal points. If you want to get rid of those, you would just go back to this window, and you can take them all away. Now if we go back, they'll be gone. So another thing we might want to do is, instead of creating a total score of these 2 test scores, we might actually want to create a mean score. So let's say that instead of adding them, we want the average. So SPSS has a whole list of functions that you can use in order to do that, and creating averages is pretty common in statistics, especially in psychology when we use scales. So it's a pretty good function to know. So again, we go back to compute variable. So everything we did before will stay. If we want to get rid of it, you would just click the reset button, and we'll bring everything back to the default. So we'll call this one score mean. And the best way to do means, or a lot of standard deviations, anything, is to take the function, because it's automatically going to treat missing data properly, whereas if you do it just with the calculator, it handles missing data differently. So my recommendation would be to actually use the function. So if you click on the all function and then go down, you'll be able to find mean right here. So you double click, and you'll notice that you have mean, bracket, question mark, comma, question mark, close bracket. So what you do is you want to replace the question marks with the names of your variables that you want to include in the mean score. So right now we only have 2, so score and score 2. However, we could have variable 3, variable 4, variable 5 if these were in our data sets, and SPSS would automatically take all of them. So the important thing is that they're separated by commas, and then there's a bracket here at the end. But for now, we don't need those. So we have our 2 scores. We click OK. Tells us that it's being done here. And then we have our mean score. So 7 plus 6, a mean of 6.5. 8 plus 7, a mean of 7.5, etc. So that would be how you create a mean score. Part 3, descriptive statistics. So the next thing we'll cover is how to run basic descriptive statistics in SPSS. So the descriptive statistics fall under the option Analyze here and Descriptive Statistics. So you'll notice that there are a lot of different options. However, the 2 easiest ones to use are frequencies and descriptives. They both do similar things, but serve different functions. So we'll start with the frequencies option. So if you click here, this window will open, and what you can do is select the variables you're interested in analyzing. So the easiest thing to do is just click here and then grab that and there. So for now, we'll just look at score and gender. As a default, this box here is going to be checked, which is going to ask SPSS to display the frequency tables. So what this will be is a table that highlights how many how many of each response we have for all the variables. So if you check that or uncheck that, it'll, it can not have that option come out. SPSS is giving us a warning right now, though, because since we haven't asked it to do anything else, it means that right now there's no analyses to run since this box hasn't been checked. So if we're interested in asking for some basic statistics, we would click here, and we can just check all the options that we're interested in. So you'll notice the central tendency measures are here. We've got mean, median, mode, and then you can actually ask for the sum of all the variables if you're interested. And then we have our measures of dispersion. So we have our standard deviation, our variance, our range, minimum, maximum, and standard error. And then we can also get our measures of skewness and kurtosis. SPSS will automatically also give you the standard error of skewness and kurtosis so that you can calculate your ratios here. And then you can also get your quartiles and percentiles if you'd like. We may as well just select it all, and we'll show you what that looks like. So you click continue, and what SPSS is going to do is bring out all of that information for both variables. Now, since we have a categorical variable here, some of these measures are going to be appropriate for that variable, and some of them will not. And then there's others that'll be more appropriate for the the continuous variable of score. But either way, we'll see what it looks like. So we click OK, and SPSS opens this new window here. And this time, since we ran some analyses, it's going to give us all of our information. So for gender, really it's telling us that we have 10 valid responses and no missing, which makes sense. We have no missing data right now. And it's the same for test scores. So the mean isn't really interesting because it's a categorical variable. That means the standard error of mean, we don't care either. The median, that as well. However, the mode is interesting since it's a categorical variable. However, because we have this little asterisk here, it means that there's more than one mode. So what this means in this data set is, since there's only two values, is that we have an equal number of males and females, and SPSS will automatically put the mode out as the lowest value that you've assigned as a code. So let's say instead of 2 categories, we had 3. If there was an equal number in all 3 categories, one would always, or the one with the lowest number would always be the one that shows up, but you just need to pay attention here to how many modes there are. So we don't care about the standard deviation or any of these things since we have a categorical variable. However, on test scores, these additional variables or this additional information does become useful. So we know that the average is 6.8 and the standard error is 0.68. We have a median of 7, a mode of 6, but again, we have more than one mode, so it means that although 6 was the most popular, there are more than one. It's not just 6, it's the mode. Standard deviation of 2.15. Our variance is 4.6. Skewness and standard error of skewness are here. Kurtosis and standard error of kurtosis are there. We have a range of 7, a minimum score of 3, and a maximum of 10. It makes sense that the range would be 7. If you add all the scores together, we have a 68, and then you can see the percentiles here. So those are our descriptive statistics. So we can get most of these same descriptive statistics through the Analyze Descriptive Statistics Descriptives option. However, you will notice that a lot of them are not available here. So if I click on Options, we have just the mean and the sum. We don't have the median or the mode. We have all of the dispersion statistics and all of the distribution ones, but we don't have those, we don't have the percentiles or the quartiles as well. So again, you can click on all the same things, and for whatever reason, if you run things through this option, SPSS automatically gives you, a different, the table or the output table has a different orientation. So instead of being, in this direction, it goes wide. So instead of having just 2 columns and a bunch of rows, we have a number of columns and just a few rows. So you can see here all the same information again, and of course, depending on whether it's categorical or continuous, you should interpret the scores accordingly. So there's 2 extra features that are available in those 2 tabs that are different from each other. So if we go back to frequencies, we can reset it, so it's going to take away all those other things we'd asked for, and we can ask it just to show us the frequency tables. So if I click OK, what this does is essentially gives me how many males, how many females we have in the data set, and how many scores of 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, etc. So if you recall, we were told that we had 2 modes. That makes sense. We have 5 males, 5 females. And we're also told that we had more than one mode on the test score. And if you recall, it told us it was 6. However, we had 2 6s, 2 7s, and 2 8s. And SPSS told us 6 was the mode since it's the lowest score. But we have more than one. So with frequency tables, what you get is, we'll use this one for the example, you get the frequency, what percentage of all scores that represents, what percentage of valid scores it represents. So if we had missing data, there would be a missing column here, and that would have a percent. And then this valid percent row would make a correction where it would not take into consideration the missing data and redistribute the percentages based on only the valid scores. And then here you have the cumulative percent. So, one score, the 3s plus the 4s plus the 6s, etc. So if we close this, so that's the other feature on Analyze Descriptives, Analyze Descriptives Frequencies. The other feature of analyze descriptives is that we can ask SPSS to give us the standardized values, so the Z scores for a variable. So this is obviously not interesting for a categorical variable. However, for the test scores, which are measured at the interval ratio level, it would be interesting to see what the corresponding Z standardized scores are. So we just select this little box here, click OK. SPSS opens this window. These are all the options we'd already selected from before since we hadn't removed it. We can close this, and when we go back to our data set, we notice that there is a new variable called Z score. So what it'll do is take the variable name we already have and add a little Z in front of it, and now we know that these are the corresponding Z scores for these scores in the data set. Okay, so next thing we might want to do is create some sort of visual representation of our data. So if you recall, for categorical variables, we're interested in bar charts, and for continuous variables, we're interested in histograms. So there's two ways to do those. Personally, the easiest way is through the descriptives and then frequencies option. However, you can also do it through the chart builder here. So I'll show you both. So in descriptive statistics, we go to descriptives frequencies. So we would select the variables that we're interested in. So since we're going to do them one at a time, since one's a categorical and one is a continuous. So we'll start with the categorical variable. So we have this here. We can unselect the display frequency tables, and then we would click on charts. So you'll notice here there's the no chart option, the bar chart, pie chart, or histograms. So since it's categorical, we'll select bar. We click continue. We click OK. And then SPSS will generate us a picture of this data. And we can see it's a pretty boring chart since we have exactly 5 males and 5 females. But what's nice is that SPSS automatically incorporates the labels or the values that we had given here for the labels rather that we given for the values. And if you want to customize the look of your graph, you can double click. And eventually it'll open. You can change the color by double clicking, and you can make it different if you'd like, but no need, etc. So lots of options there, but we have our gender, and this is the number of observations, male, female. Okay, so that's the bar chart. If we want a histogram, we go through the same option. This time we'll get rid of gender, add score, go to the charts option and click histogram instead of bar chart, and we continue, and this time we have the histogram. So the difference between a histogram and a bar chart is that the histogram uses a scale across the bottom. So this is a scale going from 0 to 12, and it's going to place the bars accordingly along that scale. Whereas with a bar chart, it's just going to automatically give a value or each category is going to have its own branch of the chart, regardless of whatever these labels are. So if we were to run the same one as a bar chart, it would separate them and you wouldn't have this scale across the bottom. So this is useful when we want to look at the distribution of scores. So we notice here there are no 5s, that's why there is a space here. And this is the frequency. So we have either 1 or 2 if you recall from our frequency frequency table. So I'll show you what this looks like as a bar chart just so you can see the difference. But if it's continuous data, we do want to be looking at it with the histogram. But this is what the equivalent bar chart would look like. So we've kind of lost the distance between the scores along the bottom, and now it's no longer obvious that 5 is missing, whereas that is important for the actual shape of the distribution. Okay, so this is not appropriate for continuous data. Part 4, the SPSS Syntax Editor. As a final step, we're going to look at how to use the syntax editor in SPSS. So luckily, using the syntax editor in SPSS is very easy and does not require any knowledge of coding. However, it does create a nice record of all of the different things that you've done in your data set. And once you start running more complicated analyses, it's nice to be able to just copy and paste your syntax and rerun it that way. So to open a new syntax file, you would go to File, New, and you would click Syntax. And a new window is going to open that looks a lot like the output editor, except that you can write things. So in SPSS syntax, the only thing you need to know is that if you want to write little notes to yourself, you need to start with an asterisk, and then you can write whatever you want. And by ending it with a period, SPSS knows not to read that line. So that's about all the code you need to know how to write, because everything else SPSS will generate for you. And the way SPSS generates it is through the paste function. So if we go back and we redo everything we already did today, we can actually ask SPSS to just paste it right into our syntax editor, and we'll have a copy. So if you recall, one of the first things we did today was we transformed our data. So we recoded some of it into a new variable. So if we look here, we have the recode into different variables option. So if we click, and we had recoded a score into a pass-fail. So instead of clicking OK and automatically running it, I can click paste. And what SPSS does here is gives me the syntax version. So it says recode score, that's the variable name, where 5 through 10 are going to be equal to 1 and 0 through 4 are going to be equal to 2 into the new variable name. So I just need to leave that here. I can delete this line that says data set activate because I only have one data set open, and I leave that there. So to run it, what you do is you select it and you click Run Selection. And what that'll do is like you clicked OK in the syntax window, except that now we have a copy of what we've done here in this nice little window. And obviously it didn't show up again here since we've already done it, but if you had given it a new name, so I'm going to add pass-fail 2, and it's going to redo the same thing again. Okay, so now we've made a new variable, and if I go back to my data set, you'll see here pass-fail score 2 has now been added. Okay, so something else that we did, where'd my syntax window go? Sorry, oh, there we are. Okay, so that was for the example there. The same thing applies for the compute. If we just click paste, it's asking me to change existing variable. Wait, so I'll just click paste and click OK, and we have it here. So it's computing score mean, and we have this. So if I want to tell myself what this was, I can just add the asterisk and say, this is how I computed the mean score for the tests. And I end it with a period. If I forgot to put the period here, you'll notice this is all gray. That is because it thinks it's part of this note to myself and not an actual command in the syntax. So by adding the period, it now knows this is a new line of code. This execute line here goes at the end of every series of commands so that you can, or SPSS knows to run it. So it's like the equivalent of putting OK. So now let's go grab the descriptive statistics. So we go back to descriptives, and again here we have that same paste option. So we can select everything we want in the menu, and then instead of clicking OK, we would select paste, and it gives us the same information. So we have frequencies on variables just score, and we ask it to make no tables and no frequency tables, but we asked for the bar chart, as you can see here. So the syntax will change depending on what you pick. Knowing the different syntax is not necessary and really understanding it. However, I do want you to get used to keeping a copy of what you did. So frequency analyses to create bar chart, let's say. Okay, and you did period, you have that there. And same thing goes for the descriptive statistics option. So here you click paste, and you'll notice that we're running descriptive statistics again on score. And then this save line is telling us to create the standardized scores. And then you'll notice here under statistics, we have all the different things we'd asked it to do. So if you delete some of these, you can delete them right from the syntax and it won't run them. Or you can leave it, and then you need to add your execute right here. So not very complicated. Like I said, this may not seem very useful right now. However, as we progress through the semester and you start running some more complicated analyses, this will be very useful to have kind of a written log of everything you've done. Or, for example, if you have to recode a lot of different variables, instead of doing it manually each time, you could just say, okay, so score 1, we do this. And then let's say, sorry, we want to do a whole bunch at once. You could say the same thing here. Okay, so score 2 is going to be 2, and then score 3 will be 3, and you can leave everything like that, and it'll do all of it at once instead of wasting the time and manually doing it each time. So there are definitely some shortcuts once you get more comfortable with the syntax, but for now, just keeping a record of the analyses you did and the score, or sorry, and the different order you did things in is sufficient enough. And as you get more comfortable, you'll see that it can help. And the syntax is pretty straightforward, especially if you have any experience with coding.